The Silent Outlaw's gun pressed cold against Clara Whitmore's temple as her dead husband's secret spilled across the bank floor. But it was his kiss, not his weapon, that truly stole her breath away. In the frozen wasteland of Dust Haven, where widows were meant to weep and outlaws were meant to hang, Clara discovered that sometimes the most dangerous man in town might be the only one worth trusting. Stay with me, dear listeners, as I unravel this tale of betrayal, redemption, and forbidden love that turned a grieving widow into a legend. Comment below which town you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story has traveled. The February wind howled through Dust Haven like a beast with broken teeth, tearing at Clara Whitmore's black mourning dress as she stood beside the fresh-turned earth of her husband's grave. Ice crystals formed on her eyelashes, but she didn't weep. Not for Samuel, not anymore. The other mourners had long since retreated to their warm homes, leaving her alone with the dead man who had made her life a living hell for 7 long years. "Rest in peace, Samuel," she whispered to the headstone, her voice carrying neither sorrow nor forgiveness. "May you find in death the warmth you never showed in life." The cemetery stretched out before her, a field of weathered crosses and crumbling stones that told the history of Dust Haven in names and dates. Samuel's grave was the newest addition, the soil still dark and loose despite the frost that glazed everything else. 3 days had passed since they'd lowered him into the ground, 3 days since she'd thrown the first handful of dirt onto his coffin with steady hands that had shocked the congregation. Sheriff Wade Garrison approached from behind, his boots crunching through the frozen grass. Clara recognized his gait without turning, heavy, purposeful, the walk of a man who believed his badge gave him dominion over more than just the law. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, touching the brim of his hat in what passed for courtesy, "you shouldn't be out here alone. Not safe for a woman, especially now." Clara finally turned to face him, noting how his eyes lingered on her figure despite her mourning attire. Wade Garrison had always looked at her like a wolf eyeing a lamb, but Samuel's presence had kept him at bay. Now, with her husband dead, the sheriff's restraint was visibly fraying. "I appreciate your concern, Sheriff," she said, her tone as cold as the wind, "but I'm perfectly capable of visiting my husband's grave without an escort." "That's just it, ma'am." Garrison stepped closer, close enough that she could smell the tobacco on his breath. "You're not just any widow. You're the banker's widow. Samuel left behind a lot of interests. Some folks might think you know more about his business than you should." "I know exactly what Samuel left behind," Clara replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Debt, mostly. The bank's books are a disaster. I'll be spending the next several months just trying to understand what he was doing." Garrison's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if you need any help going through those papers, you just let me know. Samuel and we had an understanding. I'd hate to see that understanding disappear just because he's gone." The threat hung in the air between them, as tangible as the frost forming on the gravestones. Clara understood perfectly. Samuel had been paying off the sheriff, and now Garrison expected her to continue the arrangement. "I'll keep that in mind," she said, turning back toward the grave. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I'd like a few more moments alone with my husband." Garrison lingered for a heartbeat longer, then tipped his hat again. "Don't stay out too long, Mrs. Whitmore storm's coming in from the west. Wouldn't want you getting caught in it." She listened to his footsteps fade before allowing herself to breathe freely again. The sheriff was right about one thing. A storm was coming. She could see it building on the horizon, a wall of dust and darkness that would soon swallow the setting sun. But Clara had weathered worse storms than anything nature could throw at her. 7 years with Samuel Whitmore had taught her how to survive when the very air in her lungs felt like poison. As she turned to leave, movement caught her eye. There, on the ridge overlooking the cemetery, sat a lone rider on a black horse. The figure was motionless, watching, a dark silhouette against the amber sky. Clara's hand instinctively went to the small derringer hidden in her coat pocket, another secret Samuel never knew about. The rider didn't move, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way she could discern. He simply watched. After a long moment, Clara forced herself to turn away and begin the walk back to town. When she glanced back at the ridge, the rider was gone, as if he'd been nothing more than a trick of the fading light. But there, on Samuel's grave where she had stood moments before, lay a single red rose, its petals impossibly fresh and vibrant against the frozen earth. Clara's breath caught in her throat. She looked around, searching for any sign of who might have left it, but the cemetery was empty. The rose shouldn't exist. Nothing bloomed in Dust Haven in February. She reached down and picked it up, the stem pricking her finger through her glove. A drop of blood welled up, as red as the petals. "Impossible," she whispered, but the rose was real enough, its perfume cutting through the cold air like a knife through silk. The walk back to town took her past the saloon, where the evening crowd was already gathering. She could hear their voices through the thin walls, discussing the same topic that had dominated conversation for the past week, Samuel's death. "Heart gave out," Doc Brennan said, someone was saying, but Samuel was strong as an ox, never sick a day in his life. "Maybe the widow knows more than she's telling," another voice suggested, and bitter laughter followed. Clara kept walking, her head held high despite the whispers that followed her like shadows. Let them talk. They knew nothing of the truth, nothing of the night she'd lain awake praying for deliverance, nothing of the bruises she'd hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars. The bank stood at the center of town, its red brick facade imposing even in the dying light. Samuel had been so proud of it, his monument to his own importance. Now it belonged to her, or would, once the lawyers finished sorting through the mess Samuel had left behind. She climbed the steps and unlocked the heavy oak door, stepping into the darkness within. The lamp on Samuel's desk, her desk now, flickered to life with the scratch of a match. The office looked exactly as Samuel had left it the morning he died, papers scattered across the surface, his reading glasses folded neatly beside the ledger he'd been reviewing. Clara had touched nothing, partly out of respect for the legal process, but mostly because she couldn't bear to handle his things any more than necessary. She set the rose on the desk and stared at it, trying to make sense of its presence. In 7 years of marriage, Samuel had never given her flowers. He'd considered such gestures frivolous, wasteful. "Romance is for fools and poets," he'd told her on their wedding night. "I'm a practical man, and you're a practical wife." A sound from the vault room made her freeze. The building should have been empty. She'd sent the clerks home hours ago. Clara reached for the letter opener on the desk, its weight reassuring in her hand. Slowly, carefully, she moved toward the vault room door. It stood slightly ajar, though she was certain she'd locked it that morning. Through the gap, she could see the flicker of candlelight. Someone was inside. "Who's there?" she called out, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "This is private property." "Show yourself." The light went out instantly, plunging the vault room into darkness. Clara heard footsteps, quick and light, moving toward the back entrance. She rushed forward, throwing the door wide, but the room was empty. The back door swung on its hinges, letting in the cold night air. On the vault floor, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight, lay another rose. Clara's hand trembled as she picked it up. This one was white, its petals like snow, like death, like the dress she'd worn on her wedding day before Samuel taught her the true meaning of "till death do us part." She searched the room thoroughly but found nothing else out of place, except for the boot prints in the dust. Large boots, a man's boots, with an unusual pattern on the sole. Clara knelt beside them, studying the marks. She'd seen that pattern before, but where? The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows. The storm Garrison had warned about was moving in fast. Clara secured the back door and returned to the office, both roses now lying on the desk like accusations, like promises, like threats she couldn't quite understand. She opened Samuel's ledger, determined to focus on something practical, something she could control. The numbers swam before her eyes: deposits, withdrawals, loans, foreclosures. Samuel had been busy in his final months, calling in debts, seizing properties. The Hendersons had lost their farm just 2 weeks ago. Old Man Patterson's general store was scheduled for auction next month. "Blood money," she muttered, running her finger down the columns. Every penny of it. A name caught her eye, scratched in Samuel's harsh handwriting in the margin. J. Mallory. Denied. See special file. Mallory. The name stirred something in her memory. Jonas Mallory. The Silent Outlaw. She'd heard the name whispered in the saloon, seen it on wanted posters years ago. He'd been accused of murdering a judge in Austin, though some said he'd been framed, but that had been 5 years ago, and most assumed he was dead by now. Clara searched through Samuel's desk drawers until she found what she was looking for, a locked metal box marked confidential. The key was on Samuel's key ring, the one they'd taken from his body. Inside, she found a collection of documents that made her blood run cold. Letters, signed testimonies, bank transfers, all of it painted a picture of corruption that went far deeper than she'd imagined. Samuel hadn't just been a cruel husband. He'd been a criminal, working with a network of judges, sheriffs, and businessmen to destroy anyone who stood in their way. And there, in the middle of it all, was Jonas Mallory's name, along with a confession that Samuel had provided false testimony to frame him for murder. "My God," Clara breathed, sinking into the desk chair. "Samuel, what did you do?" The front door of the bank creaked open, though she'd locked it behind her. Clara grabbed the letter opener again, her heart pounding. Footsteps approached, slow and measured, spurs jingling with each step. A man appeared in the doorway of the office, tall and lean, dressed in black from his hat to his boots. His face was obscured by shadow and the brim of his hat, but Clara could see his eyes, gray like winter storms, like gravestone granite, like the ashes of burned love letters. "Jonas Mallory," she said, not a question, but a statement. He nodded once, a gesture so slight she might have missed it. Then he reached into his coat, and Clara raised the letter opener, though she knew it would do little good against a gunman of his reputation. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out another rose. This one was red like the first, but darker, the color of blood in moonlight. He set it on the desk beside the others, then spoke for the first time, his voice rough from disuse. "Your husband destroyed my life," he said, "but I'm not here for revenge." "Then what do you want?" Clara asked, lowering the letter opener slightly. "Justice," he replied, "and your help to get it." Clara looked at the document spread across the desk, then back at the man Samuel had helped frame for murder. She should have been terrified. She should have screamed for help, run for the sheriff. But something in his eyes stopped her, a pain she recognized, a betrayal that matched her own. "You've been watching me," she said. "For 3 days," he admitted, "since the funeral. I needed to know what kind of woman you were, whether you were part of it." "And what did you conclude?" He studied her for a long moment. "That you're as much a victim as I am, maybe more. I only lost my freedom. You lost yourself." The words hit her like a physical blow. Clara felt tears threatening for the first time since Samuel's death, but she forced them back. She wouldn't cry, not now, not in front of this stranger who somehow understood. "The roses," she said. "Why?" "My mother grew roses," Jonas said, his voice softening slightly. "Even in the worst drought, even when everything else died, she kept her roses alive. She said they were proof that beauty could survive anything." He paused, looking at the 3 flowers on the desk. "I thought you might need that reminder." Clara stood slowly, moving around the desk to face him properly. Up close, she could see the lines etched into his face by years of running, the scar across his jaw, the weariness in his shoulders. He didn't look like the monster the wanted posters described. He looked like a man who'd been broken and had somehow kept going anyway. "What kind of help do you need, Hu?" she asked. "Access to these records," he said, gesturing to the papers. "There's more, isn't there? More evidence of what they did?" Clara nodded. Samuel kept everything. He was paranoid about his partners betraying him, so he documented every crime, every payoff. It's all here, locked away. "We need to get it to the federal marshals," Jonas said. "There's a judge in Austin, Judge Thornton. He's clean, one of the few. If we can get the evidence to him—" "We'll be dead before we make it out of town," Clara interrupted. "Sheriff Garrison is part of it. The moment he realizes what we're doing, then we have to be smart about it." Jonas moved to the window, peering out at the gathering storm. "How many people know you're here?" "No one. I told the clerks I was visiting Samuel's grave." "Good. We have tonight, maybe tomorrow before they start getting suspicious." He turned back to her. "I know I have no right to ask this of you. You don't know me, have no reason to trust me. But without your help, Samuel's partners will just find another way to continue their operation. More innocent people will suffer." Clara thought of the Hendersons, forced from their home in the dead of winter. She thought of old man Patterson, who'd built his store with his bare hands and was about to lose it to Samuel's greed. She thought of all the nights she'd prayed for someone, anyone, to save her from her husband's cruelty. "I'll help you," she said, the words coming out stronger than she expected. "But on one condition." Jonas raised an eyebrow, waiting. "When this is over, when justice is served, you disappear. I won't have people saying I conspired with an outlaw while my husband's body was still warm." A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. "Agreed. Though technically, I'm innocent. Technically, we're about to break into my dead husband's private files and steal evidence of criminal conspiracy," Clara countered. "I don't think technicalities matter much anymore." Jonas actually smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face completely. For a moment, Clara could see the man he might have been before Samuel and his associates destroyed his life. "You're not what I expected, Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Clara," she corrected. "And what did you expect?" "A broken woman. A victim." "I am broken," Clara admitted, "but broken things can still be sharp. Sometimes they're the sharpest things of all." Jonas nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Then let's get started. We have a lot of work to do before dawn." They spent the next hours going through Samuel's files systematically. Clara knew where he kept his most sensitive documents, in a hidden compartment behind the main vault that even the bank clerks didn't know about. Jonas worked beside her in comfortable silence, occasionally asking questions, but mostly just organizing the evidence into damning piles. "This is bigger than I thought," he said finally, holding up a ledger that detailed payoffs to half the lawmen in Texas. "Your husband was the money man for the entire operation." "He always said he was building an empire," Clara replied bitterly. "I just didn't realize it would be built on other people's graves." As they worked, Clara found herself stealing glances at Jonas. There was something calming about his presence, despite the danger he represented. He moved with economy and purpose, never wasting a gesture. When their hands accidentally touched reaching for the same document, he pulled back quickly but gently, respectful of her space in a way Samuel had never been. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said as midnight approached. Jonas looked up from the papers he was reading. "Of course. Why didn't you run? After they framed you, why stay in Texas?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Because running would have meant they won. My father was an honest man, worked his whole life to build something good. They destroyed his reputation along with mine. I couldn't leave until I cleared our name. Even if it meant living as an outlaw." Even then, he met her eyes. "Sometimes the law and justice aren't the same thing. Samuel taught me that lesson well." Before Clara could respond, they heard horses approaching fast. Jonas was at the window instantly, peering through the curtains. "5 riders," he said quietly. "Coming this way." Clara's blood went cold. "Sheriff Garrison." "Can't tell in this darkness, but probably." Jonas moved quickly, gathering the most important documents. "Is there another way out?" "The coal chute in the basement. It leads to the alley behind the hardware store. Get your coat. We're leaving." Clara grabbed her coat and the small bag she'd packed with money from the vault. Money that was technically hers now, as Samuel's widow. Jonas stuffed the documents into a saddlebag he'd brought with him, then led the way to the basement. They could hear the riders stopping outside, voices carrying on the wind. Sheriff Garrison's was loudest among them. "Check around back, boys. The widow's got to be here somewhere." The coal chute was narrow and filthy, but they squeezed through just as they heard the front door being kicked in above them. Clara's dress caught on a nail, tearing the fabric, but she didn't stop. They emerged in the alley, gasping and covered in coal dust. Jonas's horse was waiting where he'd left it, tied behind the hardware store. He mounted quickly, then reached down for Clara. She hesitated only a moment before taking his hand, allowing him to pull her up behind him. "Hold on," he said, and she wrapped her arms around his waist as he spurred the horse forward. They rode hard through the dusty streets, the storm finally breaking over them. Sand and grit filled the air, providing cover but also making it hard to see. Clara buried her face against Jonas's back, feeling the solid warmth of him through his coat. Shouts erupted behind them as Garrison's men realized they'd escaped. Gunshots cracked through the night, but the storm swallowed them. Jonas guided his horse with the skill of a man who'd spent years running, taking turns seemingly at random, but always moving toward the edge of town. They didn't stop until they reached an old line shack 5 miles outside of Dust Haven. Jonas had clearly prepared it as a hideout. There were supplies, weapons, and fresh horses waiting. He helped Clara down, his hands gentle on her waist, then immediately began preparing to move again. "We can't stay long," he said. "They'll search every building within 10 miles by dawn." Clara nodded, though exhaustion was setting in. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape was fading, leaving her shaky and cold. Jonas noticed and wrapped a blanket around her shoulders. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're the one taking the real risk," he replied. "I'm already a wanted man. You're throwing away your entire life." "My life ended the day I married Samuel," Clara said. "This is the first time in 7 years I've felt alive." Jonas studied her in the lamplight, something unreadable in his gray eyes. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met, Clara Whitmore." Before she could respond, he turned away, busying himself with the saddlebags. But Clara had seen something in his expression, a vulnerability that matched her own. They were two broken people trying to piece together justice from the fragments of their destroyed lives. "We should reach Austin in 3 days if we ride hard," Jonas said, all business again. "I know places we can hide along the way. But Clara, once we leave here, there's no going back. Garrison will brand you an outlaw too. Are you prepared for that?" Clara thought of the bank, the house Samuel had built, the respectable widow's life she was supposed to live. Then she thought of the roses Jonas had left, proof that beauty could survive anything. "I've been an outlaw since the day I started planning my husband's funeral while he was still alive," she said. "At least now I'll be free." Jonas turned to look at her again, and this time he didn't hide the admiration in his eyes. "Then we'd better get moving. We have a long ride ahead." As they prepared the horses, Clara found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 3 days ago, she'd been planning to endure widowhood in the same silent suffering that had marked her marriage. Now she was about to ride across Texas with a man she barely knew, carrying evidence that could bring down some of the most powerful men in the state. "Jonas," she said as he helped her mount her horse, "what happens after? After we deliver the evidence?" He swung up onto his own mount, considering the question. "I suppose that depends on whether we survive. And if we do..." He looked at her across the darkness between their horses. "Then maybe we both get a second chance at the lives we should have had." Clara thought about that as they rode out into the storm. A second chance. It seemed too much to hope for, but then again, roses blooming in winter had seemed impossible too. The storm raged around them as they left Dust Haven behind, two unlikely allies bound together by shared pain and a desperate hope for justice. Behind them, Sheriff Garrison and his men searched frantically through the bank, finding only empty files and the 3 roses Clara had left on Samuel's desk. Red for blood, white for death, and red again for whatever came after. The night swallowed them whole, and Clara Whitmore, the banker's widow, disappeared into legend alongside the Silent Outlaw. But their story was just beginning, written in hoofbeats and gunfire, in roses and redemption, in the space between justice and the law, where only the broken and the brave dared to tread. As they rode through the howling storm, Clara felt something she hadn't experienced in 7 years. Hope. It was as fragile as rose petals, as sharp as their thorns, but it was hers. And for now, that was enough. The trail ahead was dark and dangerous, winding through canyon and desert toward an uncertain future. But Clara didn't look back. There was nothing behind her but a grave she'd helped dig, one way or another. Ahead lay Austin, Judge Thornton, and either justice or death. She pressed closer to Jonas as they rode, feeling the solid reality of him against the surreal nature of her situation. He reached back with one hand, briefly covering hers where they clasped around his waist. A simple gesture of reassurance that meant more than any of Samuel's grand speeches ever had. "Are you afraid?" he asked over the wind. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of what you'd think." "What then?" Clara considered her words carefully. "I'm afraid of what happens when we stop running. When there's no danger, no mission, no reason for us to be together anymore." Jonas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it over the storm, he said, "Then we'll just have to find new reasons." The promise hung between them like the roses he'd left, impossible and beautiful and worth believing in despite everything logic said. Clara closed her eyes and let herself imagine it, a life where she could choose her own path, speak her own mind, love on her own terms. But first, they had to survive the night, the journey, and whatever waited for them in Austin. Justice before freedom, truth before peace. It was the bargain they'd struck, two damaged souls seeking redemption in a world that had shown them little mercy. The dawn came reluctantly to the Texas plains, painting the sky in shades of ash and amber as Clara and Jonas pushed their exhausted horses through a narrow canyon. They'd been riding for 6 hours straight, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Dust Haven. Clara's body ached in places she'd forgotten existed, but she didn't complain. Every mile was a mile further from the life that had nearly killed her spirit. Jonas suddenly raised his hand, signaling a stop. His entire body tensed, and Clara felt the change immediately. He dismounted silently, handing her his reins before creeping toward a cluster of rocks. Clara's heart hammered as she watched him disappear into the shadows. The silence stretched unbearably until he returned, his face grim. "Fresh tracks," he said quietly. "3 riders, maybe 4. They passed through here less than an hour ago." "Garrison's men?" "Most likely. They're trying to get ahead of us, set up an ambush." Jonas scanned the canyon walls, his trained eye reading the landscape like a map. "We'll have to take the long way around, through Devil's Backbone." Clara had heard of Devil's Backbone, a treacherous mountain pass that claimed lives even in good weather, but she simply nodded, trusting Jonas's judgment. He'd kept them alive this long. They backtracked 2 miles before cutting east into rougher terrain. The horses struggled with the rocky ground, and more than once Clara thought they'd have to abandon them. But Jonas knew how to coax the animals forward, speaking to them in a low, gentle voice that Clara found oddly soothing. "You're good with horses," she observed during a brief rest. "Had to be," Jonas replied, checking his mount's hooves for stones. "When you're living outside the law, your horse is your lifeline. Treat them right, and they'll carry you through hell itself." "Is that what we're riding through now?" "Hell?" Jonas looked at her, a wry smile touching his lips. "No, Clara. Hell was what we left behind. This is just the road out." They continued climbing as the sun reached its zenith. The trail narrowed until they had to ride single file, with a sheer drop on one side and an unforgiving cliff face on the other. Clara kept her eyes fixed on Jonas's back, refusing to look down at the dizzying heights. That's when they heard it, the distinctive crack of a rifle shot, followed by the whine of a bullet ricocheting off the rocks near Clara's head. Jonas reacted instantly, spurring his horse forward while shouting for Clara to stay low. Another shot rang out, then another. They were being fired upon from above. "There!" Jonas pointed to a cave entrance partially hidden by scrub brush. "Get to cover!" They crashed through the brush and into the cave just as a 4th shot sparked off the rocks where they'd been moments before. The horses whinnied in fear, but the cave was deep enough to shelter them all. Jonas immediately positioned himself at the entrance, his rifle ready. "Can you shoot?" he asked Clara without looking back. "Samuel made sure I couldn't," she replied, her voice bitter. "Said women with guns got dangerous ideas." "Then you're about to learn." Jonas pulled a second revolver from his saddlebag and showed her quickly how to load and cock it. 6 shots. Make them count. Anyone comes through that entrance who isn't me, you put 2 in their chest. Before Clara could respond, Jonas was moving. He slipped out of the cave and disappeared into the rocks with a grace that belied his size. Clara gripped the revolver with trembling hands, its weight both foreign and somehow right. She thought about all the times she'd fantasized about having a gun when Samuel's temper turned violent. Now she had one, and the irony wasn't lost on her. Gunfire erupted outside, rapid exchanges that echoed through the canyon like thunder. Clara counted shots, trying to track Jonas's position, but the acoustics made it impossible. Then suddenly, silence. Her finger tightened on the trigger as footsteps approached the cave. "It's me!" Jonas called out before appearing. Blood ran from a graze on his cheek and his shirt was torn, but he was alive. "2 of them. Local bounty hunters, not Garrison's men." "Did you—" Clara couldn't finish the question. "They'll live, but they won't be following us. Jonas retrieved medical supplies from his pack and began cleaning his wound with practiced efficiency. Word's already out about the price on our heads. Every gun for hire in Texas will be looking for us. How much? Clara asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. 5,000 for me. 3,000 for you. He met her eyes. Garrison wants us bad. Clara laughed, surprising herself with the sound. 3,000? I'm insulted. I thought stealing evidence of massive criminal conspiracy would be worth at least 4. Jonas stared at her for a moment, then his own laughter joined hers. It was absurd, laughing in a cave while men hunted them like animals, but something about the moment demanded it. When their laughter faded, Jonas was looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. You continue to surprise me, Clara Whitmore. Good, she replied. Samuel hated surprises, said they were inefficient. Samuel was a fool. The words came out harder than Jonas probably intended, and he turned away. We should keep moving. This cave connects to a series of tunnels that will bring us out on the other side of the mountain. They led the horses through the darkness, following the narrow beam of Jonas's lantern. The tunnels were ancient, carved by water over millennia, and several times they had to squeeze through passages barely wide enough for the horses. Clara's dress, already ruined from the coal chute, tore further on the jagged rocks. She was beginning to understand why Jonas wore all black. It hid the damage of a life lived in constant flight. Tell me about that night, Clara said as they navigated a particularly tight passage. The night the judge died. Jonas was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his voice came, low and measured. Judge Harrison was a good man, one of the few who couldn't be bought. He was investigating your husband's network, getting close to exposing them. They needed him gone, and they needed someone to blame. So they chose you. I was convenient. An outsider who'd been vocal about the corruption in town. They invited me to a meeting, said the judge wanted to discuss my concerns privately. When I arrived, Harrison was already dead. Shot with my gun, one that had been stolen from my room the week before. Your husband was the star witness, claimed he saw me leaving the scene. But you weren't there. I was at the church, helping Father Miguel with the orphans. 20 witnesses who could verify it. But Samuel's word carried more weight than 20 Mexican children and an old priest. Jonas's voice held no bitterness, just a tired acceptance. They ran me out of town that night. I've been running ever since. Clara reached out in the darkness and found his hand. He tensed at her touch but didn't pull away. We'll make them pay for what they did. To you, to those children who lost Father Miguel's help when you had to flee, to everyone they've destroyed. Jonas squeezed her hand gently. It's dangerous to make promises in the dark, Clara. The light has a way of changing things. As if in response to his words, they emerged from the tunnels into blinding afternoon sunlight. They were on the far side of Devil's Backbone, with a clear view of the valley stretching toward Austin. It should have been a moment of triumph, but Jonas suddenly pushed Clara behind a boulder, his gun already drawn. Riders, he hissed. 8 of them, coming up the trail. Clara peered around the rock, and her blood went cold. Sheriff Garrison himself led the group, his star glinting in the sun. Beside him rode the Carson brothers, Jake and William, notorious gunmen who'd been Samuel's favorite enforcers. The others she recognized as deputies and hired guns. They knew we'd come this way, Jonas muttered. Someone's feeding them information. Can we go back through the tunnels? They'll have men watching the other entrance by now. Jonas checked his ammunition, his face grim. We're trapped. Clara's mind raced. 8 men against 1, with her barely knowing how to hold a gun. The odds were impossible. Unless... Jonas, give me the documents. He looked at her sharply. What? Trust me. Give me the papers and stay hidden. Before he could protest, Clara was standing, walking into clear view with her hands raised. Sheriff Garrison! I surrender! She heard Jonas curse behind the rocks, but he didn't reveal himself. Garrison and his men spurred their horses forward, surrounding her in moments. The sheriff dismounted, his hand resting on his pistol. Well, well, the grieving widow. Where's your outlaw friend, Clara? Dead, Clara said flatly. Shot by those bounty hunters back in the canyon. I barely escaped. Garrison studied her, Suspicious. Then where are the documents? Clara reached into her coat slowly, pulling out a handful of papers. Not the real evidence, but decoy documents Jonas had prepared. Here, take them. I just want this nightmare to end. Jake Carson snatched the papers, scanning them quickly. Boss, these are just bank records, nothing incriminating. You lying bitch! Garrison backhanded Clara, sending her sprawling in the dirt. Where are the real documents? Clara tasted blood but forced herself to laugh. You think Samuel would trust me with anything important? I grabbed what I could, hoping it meant something. Jonas said it was evidence, but he lied to me, used me to escape town. She's telling the truth, boss, William Carson said. Samuel always said his wife was pretty, but useless. Couldn't even give him a son. The casual cruelty of the comment cut deeper than Garrison's blow. Clara had lost 3 babies during her marriage, each miscarriage following one of Samuel's violent episodes. But she used the pain, let it show on her face, selling her story. Garrison grabbed her arm, hauling her to her feet. You're coming with us anyway. Maybe Mallory's dead, maybe he isn't, but if he's alive, having you might draw him out. Wade, Jake Carson interrupted, pointing toward the setting sun. We need to move. There's another storm coming. Garrison nodded, shoving Clara toward his horse. That's when Jonas struck. His first shot took out Jake Carson's gun hand. The second dropped William's horse, sending the man tumbling. Chaos erupted as the remaining men scrambled for cover, firing wildly at the rocks where Jonas had been. But he was already moving. Clara dropped to the ground, rolling behind a fallen log as bullets flew overhead. She still had Jonas's revolver, and now she used it, firing at a deputy who'd gotten too close. The shot went wide, but it forced him back. Jonas was everywhere and nowhere, using the terrain he'd scouted earlier. Each shot found its mark. Not killing, but disabling. A shoulder here, a leg there, he was methodical, surgical, turning 8-to-1 odds into something manageable. But Garrison was no fool. While his men engaged Jonas, the sheriff circled around, coming up behind Clara's position. She didn't see him until his gun pressed against her temple. Mallory, Garrison shouted. Show yourself, or I paint the rocks with her brains. The shooting stopped. Jonas emerged from cover, his rifle pointed at Garrison's head. Let her go, Wade. This is between you and me. Nothing personal, Mallory. Just business. Samuel paid well to keep you running. Now his widow's going to pay for your interference. Samuel's dead, Jonas said evenly. Your meal ticket's gone. Kill us, and you'll never find where we hid the real documents. Every federal marshal in Texas will get copies within the week. Garrison's gun wavered slightly. You're bluffing. Letter dated yesterday, sent to Judge Thornton in Austin. If we don't show up to stop it, it gets delivered along with enough evidence to hang you and everyone in Samuel's network. Jonas took a step closer. But you let her go, and we can make a deal. Clara felt Garrison's grip loosen slightly as greed warred with caution in his mind. It was all the opening she needed. She drove her elbow back into his stomach while dropping to the ground. Jonas's shot rang out before Garrison could recover, the bullet catching the sheriff's gun hand. Garrison screamed, dropping his weapon. Clara scrambled for it, coming up with the pistol aimed at the wounded sheriff. Her hands were steady now, steadier than they'd ever been. Clara, Jonas said carefully. Don't. She wanted to pull the trigger. God, how she wanted to. This man had protected Samuel, enabled him, profited from the suffering of others. But looking at him bleeding in the dirt, she saw what she could become, another link in the chain of violence. She lowered the gun. You're going to deliver a message to the others. Tell them we're coming. Tell them justice is coming. And tell them that Clara Whitmore sends her regards. Jonas collected the weapons from the wounded men while Clara retrieved their horses. Most of Garrison's gang would survive, but they wouldn't be following anyone for weeks. As they prepared to leave, Garrison called out through gritted teeth, You think you've won? Samuel had partners from here to Dallas. They'll hunt you down like dogs. Then we'll die as free people, Clara replied, which is more than you'll ever be. They rode hard as the storm approached, this time from the north. Jonas led them to a cabin he knew, abandoned but sturdy, where they could rest and tend their wounds. As Clara helped clean the graze on his face, her fingers gentle against his skin, Jonas caught her hand. That was incredibly brave and incredibly foolish. I learned from the best, she replied, glancing meaningfully at him. Clara, he began, but she pressed a finger to his lips. Don't. Don't tell me it was too dangerous or that I should have stayed hidden or any of the things Samuel would have said. I made my choice. I'll keep making it. Jonas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right. But next time, warn me before you surrender to 8 armed men. Next time, Clara raised an eyebrow. You're planning on making a habit of this? Until justice is served or we're dead. He paused, then added softly, though I'm hoping for the former. They spent the night in the cabin, taking turns keeping watch while the storm raged outside. Clara found herself studying Jonas in the lamplight during his sleep, noting how the tension left his face, making him look younger, less burdened. She wondered what he'd been like before all this, before Samuel and his associates had stolen his life. When Jonas woke for his watch, he found Clara still awake, staring at the papers they'd risked everything to steal. Can't sleep? He asked, settling beside her. Reading. She held up a letter. This is from a senator. He's promising Samuel legislative support in exchange for a cut of the profits. They're all connected, Jonas said. That's why local law enforcement could never touch them. The corruption goes all the way to Austin, maybe further. Then we're not just fighting criminals. We're fighting the system itself. Jonas was quiet for a moment. Having second thoughts? Clara turned to look at him. No. For the first time in my life, I know exactly what I'm doing and why. Samuel took 7 years from me. These men took 5 from you. How many other lives have they destroyed? Too many to count. Then we stop them. Whatever it takes. Jonas reached over and took her hand. You know there's a good chance we won't survive this. I know. Clara squeezed his fingers. But isn't it better to die fighting for something that matters than to live as someone's victim? Is that really living, though? Being a victim? Clara thought about her years with Samuel, the careful way she'd had to move through her own home, the constant fear, the slow erosion of her spirit. No, it's not. I was a ghost haunting my own life. You gave me the chance to be real again. You gave yourself that chance. I just provided the roses. They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the storm through the window. Lightning illuminated the landscape in brief, violent moments, revealing a world transformed by wind and water. Clara thought it was fitting. They were in their own storm, reshaping the landscape of their lives through violence and determination. Tell me about your mother, Clara said suddenly. The one who grew roses. Jonas smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. Maria Esperanza Mallory, toughest woman in Texas. Came up from Mexico with nothing but determination and a handful of rose cuttings. Built a garden in the desert through sheer will. What happened to her? Died when I was 15. Consumption. But those roses still bloom on her grave, wild now, but beautiful. He paused, lost in memory. She would have liked you. She appreciated women who refused to break. I broke, Clara admitted, many times. But you put yourself back together. That's what matters. Jonas turned to face her fully. Clara, when this is over. A gunshot shattered the window, cutting off his words. They dove for cover as more shots followed, splintering the cabin's wooden walls. Jonas crawled to the window, peering out carefully. How did they find us? Clara gasped. Doesn't matter. We need to move. Jonas grabbed their bags, stuffing the documents inside. Back door, now. They burst out into the storm, the rain immediately soaking them. Muzzle flashes in the darkness showed at least 6 shooters advancing on the cabin. Jonas and Clara ran for the horses, bullets whining past them like angry wasps. Clara's horse screamed and went down, a bullet in its flank. Jonas grabbed her arm, swinging her up behind him on his mount. They galloped into the night, riders pursuing, the storm turning the world into a chaos of water and wind. The river, Jonas shouted over the storm. We have to cross at Devil's Ford. Clara knew Devil's Ford, a dangerous crossing even in good weather. In a storm like this, it would be near suicide. But the alternative was capture and certain death. She pressed closer to Jonas, trusting him completely. They reached the ford just as lightning revealed the swollen river, brown with runoff and moving fast. Jonas didn't hesitate, spurring his horse into the torrent. The water rose quickly, reaching the horse's chest, then higher. The current pulled at them, threatening to sweep them downstream. "Hold on!" Jonas yelled, but his words were lost in the roar of the water. The horse struggled valiantly, but the current was too strong. They were pulled from the saddle, plunged into the frigid water. Clara went under immediately, the weight of her soaked dress dragging her down. She couldn't tell which way was up, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Strong arms grabbed her, pulling her to the surface. Jonas held her tight with one arm while swimming desperately with the other. They slammed into a rock, the impact driving the breath from Clara's lungs, but Jonas managed to grab hold. He pulled them both onto the boulder, gasping and coughing. The riders had reached the far bank but didn't attempt to cross. Clara could see them milling about in frustration before turning back. The storm had saved them, but at a cost. They'd lost the horse, most of their supplies, and were now stranded on a rock in the middle of a raging river. "We have to reach the other side," Jonas shouted. Clara nodded, though terror gripped her. She'd never learned to swim properly, another thing Samuel had forbidden. But Jonas didn't let go of her. Together they fought their way across the remaining distance, using rocks and debris as handholds. They collapsed on the opposite bank, exhausted and shivering. Jonas immediately pulled Clara against him, sharing what little warmth they had left. "The documents," Clara gasped. "Are they—" Jonas patted the oilskin pouch still strapped to his body. "Safe." Wet, but safe. They found shelter in a grove of trees, huddling together as the storm began to pass. As dawn approached, they took stock of their situation. They were alone, on foot, still 2 days from Austin, with half of Texas looking for them. "We could find a town, steal horses," Jonas suggested. "Too risky. Every sheriff between here and Austin has our descriptions by now." Clara wrung water from her ruined dress. "We walk." "You're exhausted. You nearly drowned." "I'm alive," Clara countered. "That's more than I expected when I left Dust Haven." "We walk, Jonas. We finish this." He looked at her with something approaching awe. "How are you so strong?" Clara laughed, though there was no humor in it. "I'm not strong. I'm angry. 7 years of rage, finally given purpose. Samuel thought he'd broken me, turned me into the perfect, obedient wife. But all he did was forge me into something harder, something that could survive him. And what happens when the anger runs out?" Clara considered the question. "Then I'll find something else to drive me. Hope, maybe, or love." She looked at Jonas meaningfully. "There are worse things to live for." Before Jonas could respond, they heard horses approaching. Both tensed, ready to run, but then they heard a familiar voice calling out, "Jonas Mallory! Clara Whitmore! I'm Father Miguel Delgado. I'm here to help." Jonas's face transformed with shock and hope. "Miguel, it can't be." An elderly priest emerged from the trees, leading 2 horses. His face was weathered and kind, his eyes holding the wisdom of someone who'd seen too much but still believed in redemption. "My son," Father Miguel said, embracing Jonas, "word reached me of your quest. I've come to ensure you reach Austin safely." "How did you find us?" Clara asked, suspicious despite Jonas's obvious trust. "The Lord works in mysterious ways," Father Miguel replied with a slight smile. "Also, I've been tracking you since Dust Haven. Someone needs to watch over you foolish children." He produced dry clothes, food, and water from his saddlebags. As Clara changed behind a screen of trees, she heard Jonas and Father Miguel talking in low voices. "She's remarkable," the priest was saying. "She's everything Samuel didn't deserve," Jonas replied. "Father, I think I know, my son. It's written all over your face. But be careful, she's been hurt deeply. She needs time to heal." "We may not have time. This could end badly for both of us. Then make the most of whatever time God grants you. Love doesn't wait for perfect circumstances." Clara emerged in the simple dress Father Miguel had brought, feeling more like herself than she had in years. The expensive gowns Samuel had forced her to wear had been costumes, disguises. This simple clothing felt like truth. "We should move," Father Miguel said. "I have friends at missions along the way. You'll have safe places to rest." They traveled through the day, Father Miguel's presence lending them an air of legitimacy that made passing through towns easier. But Clara noticed Jonas growing increasingly tense as they neared Austin. That night, at a mission 20 miles from the city, Clara found Jonas standing watch on the roof, staring at the stars. "What's wrong?" she asked, settling beside him. "Tomorrow we reach Austin. We deliver the evidence. Then what?" "Then justice," Clara said simply. "And us? What happens to us?" Jonas turned to her, his eyes intense. "Clara, I need to tell you something before we—" She kissed him. It was impulsive, born of exhaustion and fear and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. Jonas froze for a moment, then responded, his hand coming up to cup her face gently. The kiss was nothing like Samuel's demanding possessiveness. It was a question, a promise, a shared understanding between two damaged souls. When they parted, Clara was breathless. "Whatever happens tomorrow, we face it together. That's all I need to know." Jonas pulled her against him, and they stayed that way, watching the stars and not speaking of the danger that awaited them in Austin. In a few hours, they would risk everything to bring down Samuel's network. They might die. They might be separated forever. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. Two broken people who'd found something worth fighting for, worth dying for, worth living for. And sometimes, Clara thought, as she felt Jonas's heartbeat against her cheek, that was enough. Sometimes that was everything. The morning sun cast long shadows across Austin's streets as Father Miguel led them through the back alleys toward Judge Thornton's residence. Clara pulled her shawl tighter, acutely aware of how many eyes might recognize them despite their disguises. Jonas had shaved his beard and wore Father Miguel's spare cassock, while Clara posed as a nun, her face partially hidden by a habit. Still, she felt exposed, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical danger. "The judge's home is 3 blocks ahead," Father Miguel whispered. "But there's a problem." Jonas tensed beside Clara. "What kind of problem?" "Sheriff Garrison arrived in Austin last night. He's been spreading word that you murdered 2 of his deputies during your escape. The federal marshals are looking for you both, but not to help you, to arrest you." Clara's heart sank. They'd come so far, endured so much, only to find their last hope turned against them. "Garrison got here first. He's poisoned the well." "Not entirely," Father Miguel said. "Judge Thornton is a fair man, but he'll need compelling evidence to go against the word of a sheriff. The challenge will be reaching him without being arrested first." They paused in an alley across from the judge's mansion, a stately white building surrounded by armed guards. Clara counted at least 6 men patrolling the grounds, all wearing federal badges. "There's no way past them," Jonas said grimly. "Perhaps not for Jonas Mallory and Clara Whitmore," Father Miguel agreed. "But Sister Mary Catherine has urgent spiritual business with the judge's wife, who happens to be very devout." Clara looked at the priest in surprise. "You want me to go in alone?" "Not alone," Jonas protested immediately. "It's too dangerous." "It's our only chance," Clara countered, though fear coiled in her stomach. "If they're looking for both of us together, one nun won't raise suspicion." Father Miguel nodded approvingly. "Mrs. Thornton holds a prayer meeting every Tuesday morning. You'll join it, then find a way to speak privately with the judge. Jonas and I will create a distraction if needed." "And if it's a trap?" Jonas asked, his jaw tight with tension. "Then we'll know soon enough." Clara touched Jonas's arm gently. "Trust me. I've spent 7 years pretending to be someone I'm not. I can do this." Jonas caught her hand, holding it tightly. "Clara, if something happens, nothing will happen," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I'll deliver the documents and meet you at the mission by nightfall." Before he could argue further, Clara took the oilskin pouch containing their evidence and tucked it beneath her habit. She walked toward the mansion with measured steps, channeling every lesson in demure behavior Samuel had beaten into her. At the gate, a marshal stopped her. "State your business, sister." "I'm here for Mrs. Thornton's prayer meeting," Clara said, keeping her voice soft and humble. "Father Miguel sent me from the San Antonio mission." The marshal studied her suspiciously. "Haven't seen you before." "I've only recently taken my vows." Please, sir, I don't wish to be late. Mrs. Thornton values punctuality in spiritual matters. Something in her submissive tone satisfied him. Men like him, like Samuel, never suspected danger from a woman who knew her place. He waved her through, and Clara forced herself not to look back at where Jonas watched from the shadows. The interior of the Thornton mansion was opulent but tasteful, with religious artwork adorning the walls. Clara followed the sound of voices to a parlor where 6 women sat in a circle, Bibles in their laps. Mrs. Thornton, a handsome woman in her 50s, looked up with a welcoming smile. "Sister, how wonderful. Please join us. We're discussing the parable of the lost sheep." Clara took an empty chair, her mind racing. How could she get to the judge without arousing suspicion? As the women discussed scripture, she noticed a servant entering periodically to refresh their tea. The man wore the hollow look of someone who'd seen too much and cared too little, exactly the type who might be bribed. When the prayer meeting concluded an hour later, Clara lingered, pretending to admire a painting of the Last Supper. Mrs. Thornton approached her. "You seem troubled, sister. Is there something you'd like to discuss?" Clara saw her opening. "Actually, ma'am, I carry an urgent message for your husband. It concerns a matter of justice and Christian mercy." Mrs. Thornton's expression cooled slightly. "My husband doesn't discuss legal matters with—" "It's about Jonas Mallory," Clara interrupted, dropping her voice, "and the conspiracy that framed him for murder." The older woman went very still. "You're treading on dangerous ground, sister. I have proof. Documents that show Sheriff Garrison and others conspired to frame an innocent man. Your husband is the only judge in Texas with the courage to see justice done. Please, I must speak with him." Mrs. Thornton studied her for a long moment. "You're not really a nun, are you?" Clara met her gaze steadily. "No, ma'am. But I am someone who believes in justice, just as your husband does. Wait here." Mrs. Thornton left the room, and Clara spent 10 agonizing minutes wondering if she'd just signed her own death warrant. Then the door opened, and Judge Thornton himself entered, a tall, distinguished man with piercing blue eyes and silver hair. "My wife says you have information about the Mallory case." Clara pulled out the oilskin pouch, spreading the documents on a side table. "Everything's here, Your Honor. Proof that Samuel Whitmore, Sheriff Garrison, and dozens of others conspired to frame Jonas Mallory, steal property, and murder those who opposed them." Judge Thornton examined the papers carefully, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is extraordinary. If these are authentic, they are. I took them from my husband's private files myself." The judge looked up sharply. "Your husband? You're Clara Whitmore?" "Yes, Your Honor. And before you call for the marshals, please understand that everything Sheriff Garrison told you is a lie. Jonas Mallory never killed those deputies. He disabled them to save my life. We're not the criminals here." Sheriff Garrison painted quite a different picture. He says you and Mallory murdered your husband, then killed 2 lawmen during your escape. Samuel died of a heart attack 3 days before I ever met Jonas Mallory. Dr. Brennan in Dust Haven can confirm that. As for the deputies, they're wounded but alive. Garrison is desperate to silence us before we can expose his crimes. Judge Thornton moved to his desk, still studying the documents. This ledger shows payments to half the lawmen in Texas, including Garrison. Look at the entry from March, $10,000 for ensuring the Harrison verdict. Judge Harrison. He was a good friend. Thornton's voice hardened. If what these documents suggest is true, it's all true. And there's more where this came from. Samuel documented everything, paranoid that his partners might betray him. The judge was quiet for a long moment, then moved to the window. "Sheriff Garrison is downstairs in my study right now, waiting to collect you and Mallory. He has 6 men with him." Clara's blood ran cold. "He knew I was coming?" "He's been watching the house. Probably let you in to trap Mallory when he tries to rescue you." Thornton turned back to her. "But what he doesn't know is that I've had my own suspicions about him for some time. Your documents confirm what I've suspected but couldn't prove." "Then you'll help us." "I'll do more than that. Mrs. Whitmore, how quickly can you get Mallory here?" "He's nearby, but—" "Good. Because we're going to need his testimony." The judge moved to his desk, writing quickly. "This is a federal warrant for Sheriff Garrison's arrest. The challenge will be serving it when he has 6 armed men with him. A commotion erupted outside, shouting, gunshots. Clara rushed to the window to see Jonas and Father Miguel riding hard toward the mansion, pursued by marshals. Her heart sank as she realized they must have thought she was in danger. "That's our distraction," Judge Thornton said grimly. "Come with me." They hurried downstairs to find chaos. Garrison and his men had rushed outside at the sound of gunfire, leaving the study unguarded. Judge Thornton quickly gathered additional documents from his safe. "These are affidavits I've been collecting for months. Combined with your evidence, they'll be enough to bring down the entire network." More gunshots echoed from outside. Through the window, Claire could see Jonas pinned down behind an overturned carriage, Father Miguel beside him. The marshals were closing in. "We have to help them," Clara said desperately. Judge Thornton nodded. "Stay behind me." He strode out the front door, his commanding presence immediately drawing attention. "Stand down! All of you, stand down immediately." The firing ceased, though weapons remained drawn. Garrison turned to the judge, his face flushed with excitement. "Judge Thornton, we've got them cornered. The murderers—" "The only murderer I see is you, Sheriff Garrison." Thornton held up the federal warrant. "You're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, and corruption." Garrison's face went white, then red with rage. "You can't be serious. These are wanted criminals. These are victims of your criminal conspiracy. I have examined the evidence, and it's damning." The judge addressed the federal marshals. "Arrest Sheriff Garrison and his men. Anyone who resists will be charged with obstruction of justice." For a moment, nobody moved. The tension stretched taut as a bowstring. Then Garrison went for his gun. Several things happened at once. Jonas fired from his position, knocking the gun from Garrison's hand. 2 of Garrison's men raised their weapons but were immediately tackled by federal marshals. Clara grabbed a rifle from a nearby guard and aimed it at Jake Carson, who was trying to flank Jonas. "Don't even think about it," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. The standoff lasted only seconds before Garrison's men realized they were outnumbered and outmaneuvered. One by one, they dropped their weapons. Garrison himself stood clutching his wounded hand, his face twisted with hatred as he stared at Clara. "You treacherous bitch," he snarled. "You'll hang for this. Both of you will hang." "The only person facing the gallows is you," Judge Thornton said coldly. "Take him away." As the marshals led Garrison and his men away in shackles, Jonas and Father Miguel approached cautiously. Jonas's eyes found Clara immediately, relief flooding his features. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands checking her for injuries despite her protests. "I'm fine. Judge Thornton believes us. It's over, Jonas. We did it." But Jonas was shaking his head. "It's not over. Garrison was just one tentacle of this beast. The others will come for us." Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Mr. Mallory is correct. This is far from over. The trial alone will take months, and you'll both need protection. I'm placing you in federal custody, not as prisoners, but as protected witnesses." "No," Clara said immediately. "We're not going into hiding. These men thrived because people were too afraid to stand up to them. We face them in the open and will testify in the open." "That's brave but foolish," the judge warned. "There will be attempts on your lives." "Then we'll face them," Jonas said, moving to stand beside Clara. "Together." Father Miguel smiled proudly. "I'll stay as well. These two will need spiritual guidance through the trials ahead." Judge Thornton sighed. "Very well, but you'll accept a protective detail, and you'll stay where I can keep you safe. There's a boarding house near the courthouse, run by a woman I trust. You'll stay there until the trial." The boarding house turned out to be a fortress disguised as a genteel residence. Mrs. Hammond, the proprietor, was a former army nurse who ran her establishment with military precision. She took one look at Clara and Jonas and assigned them rooms on the same floor, close enough for safety, but separate enough for propriety. That first night, Clara couldn't sleep. The adrenaline of the day's events still coursed through her veins. She found herself at her window, staring out at the gaslit streets of Austin, when a soft knock came at her door. "It's me," Jonas's voice said quietly. She let him in, noting how he checked the hallway before entering. Even in relative safety, he remained vigilant. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Too much to process." He moved to the window, standing beside her. Clara, what you did today, walking into that house alone, facing down the judge, it was incredible. I was terrified every moment. But you did it anyway. That's what courage is. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Jonas spoke again. The trial will be brutal. They'll try to destroy your reputation, paint you as a bitter wife who conspired to kill her husband. Let them try. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's enough. Jonas turned to her, his expression intense. Is it? Clara, when this is over, when justice is served, what then? What do you want? She considered the question. For 7 years, she'd wanted nothing more than freedom from Samuel. Now that she had it, the future seemed vast and uncertain. I want to rebuild the bank, she said finally. Run it honestly. Help the people Samuel hurt. Give them second chances instead of foreclosures. She paused, gathering courage. And I want to do it with someone who understands what it means to rebuild from nothing. Jonas's hand found hers in the darkness. That's a beautiful dream. What about you? What do you want? He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, so softly she almost missed it, he said, I want to stop running. Find somewhere to belong. Maybe with someone who sees me as more than just an outlaw. Clara turned to face him fully. I see you, Jonas Mallory. I see the man who risked everything to save strangers, who left roses on a grave to remind a broken woman that beauty still exists, who fought impossible odds for justice. She reached up to touch his face gently. I see you. He caught her hand, pressing it against his cheek. Clara, Another knock interrupted them, this one urgent. Mr. Mallory? Mrs. Whitmore? Mrs. Hammond's voice was tense. Judge Thornton needs you immediately. There's been a development. They found the judge in Mrs. Hammond's parlor, his face grim. Several federal marshals stood guard at the windows. What's happened? Jonas asked. Sheriff Garrison escaped during transport. 2 marshals are dead. Thornton's jaw was tight with anger. He had help, professionals. They knew exactly when and where to strike. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. He'll come for us. Yes, he will. Which is why I'm moving up the trial. We start tomorrow. Tomorrow? Jonas protested. We haven't prepared. Better unprepared than dead. I've sent word to every newspaper in Texas. By morning, this story will be too public for them to suppress. Your testimony, combined with the documents, will be enough. And if Garrison tries to stop the trial, Clara asked. Judge Thornton smiled grimly. Then he'll have to go through 24 federal marshals and an angry crowd of citizens who've been waiting years for justice. That night, Clara found herself unable to stay in her room. She wandered the boarding house until she found Jonas in the kitchen making coffee by lamplight. Couldn't sleep either, he asked, pouring her a cup. I keep thinking about tomorrow. What if I can't do it? What if I freeze when I see all those people, when they ask about Samuel, about our marriage? Jonas moved around the table to sit beside her. You won't freeze. You're the strongest person I know. I don't feel strong. I feel like that frightened girl who married Samuel because she had no other choice. Clara's hands trembled around the coffee cup. What if they're right? What if I am just a bitter widow who... Jonas kissed her, cutting off her words. It was different from their first kiss, deeper, more certain. When they parted, he kept his forehead pressed against hers. You're not bitter, he said firmly. You're brave. You're brilliant. You're everything Samuel never deserved and never understood. Tomorrow, you're going to walk into that courtroom and tell the truth. And the truth will set us both free. What if it doesn't? What if they don't believe us? Then we'll have tried. That's more than most people get. A chance to fight back, to speak truth to power. He pulled back slightly to look at her. Clara, whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know something. Jonas, please let me say this. I've spent 5 years running, 5 years with nothing but anger and the hope for justice keeping me going. Then I saw you at that cemetery, standing over the grave of the man who destroyed my life, and you weren't celebrating, you weren't relieved. You were just empty, empty. And I recognized that emptiness because I'd felt it too. Clara's eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. Why are you telling me this now? Because tomorrow we might die, or we might be separated, or 1,000 other things might happen. But tonight, right now, I need you to know that these past few days with you have meant more to me than the past 5 years combined. You gave me something to fight for besides revenge. You gave me hope. You gave me the same thing, Clara whispered. When you left that first rose, you reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of feeling something besides fear and anger. They sat together in the kitchen until dawn, not speaking much, just drawing comfort from each other's presence. When the sun finally rose, casting golden light through the windows, they were ready. The courthouse was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread through Austin like wildfire. The widow of a corrupt banker and a framed outlaw were going to expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Texas society. Clara saw familiar faces in the crowd, including several from Dust Haven who'd made the journey to witness justice being served. Judge Thornton called the court to order, and the prosecutor, a young federal attorney named Davidson, began presenting the evidence. Document by document, payment by payment, crime by crime, he laid out the web of corruption that Samuel had helped weave. Then it was Clara's turn to testify. She walked to the witness stand on steady legs, though her heart hammered against her ribs. The bailiff swore her in, and then Prosecutor Davidson approached. Mrs. Whitmore, tell us about your late husband's business practices. Clara took a deep breath and began. She told them about the foreclosures, the families destroyed, the bribes paid to ensure no one could stop them. She produced ledgers, letters, signed confessions Samuel had kept as insurance against his partners. And how did you come to possess these documents? Davidson asked. I found them after Samuel's death. He had a secret compartment in the bank vault where he kept his most sensitive materials. Why didn't you immediately turn them over to the authorities? Clara met Sheriff Garrison's empty chair. He still hadn't been recaptured, with steady eyes. Because Sheriff Garrison was one of the authorities. I knew if I tried to report this through normal channels, I'd end up dead. The defense attorney, a sharp-faced man named Wickham, stood for cross-examination. Mrs. Whitmore, isn't it true that you had a difficult marriage? Yes. That your husband was often cruel to you? Yes. So you had reason to hate him? Clara straightened her spine. I had reason to fear him. There's a difference. But you're not sorry he's dead. No, Clara said simply. I'm not. But I didn't kill him, if that's what you're implying. Dr. Brennan's testimony confirms Samuel died of natural causes. How convenient that he died just as you were planning to expose his crimes. I wasn't planning anything. I didn't know about the extent of his crimes until after his death. Wickham smiled coldly. So you claim. Tell me, Mrs. Whitmore, what is your relationship with Jonas Mallory? Clara felt heat rise to her cheeks but kept her voice steady. He's helping me seek justice for the crimes committed against him and others. Just helping? Nothing more intimate? Objection, Prosecutor Davidson called out. Relevance? Goes to witness credibility and motivation, Wickham replied. Judge Thornton nodded. I'll allow it, but tread carefully, counselor. Wickham turned back to Clara. I'll ask again. What is your relationship with Jonas Mallory? Clara lifted her chin. Jonas Mallory is the bravest, most honorable man I've ever known. He lost everything because my husband lied. He spent 5 years running from false charges, and despite all that, when he could have taken revenge, he chose justice instead. So yes, I admire him. I respect him. And if that damages my credibility in your eyes, then you're as blind as my husband was. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Wickham, thrown off by her directness, fumbled for his next question. Before he could find it, the courtroom doors burst open. Sheriff Garrison stood in the doorway, wild-eyed and holding a gun. Behind him, 3 armed men spread out, weapons drawn. Nobody move, Garrison shouted. This farce ends now. Screams erupted as people dove for cover. Jonas immediately moved toward Clara, but one of Garrison's men fired a warning shot that stopped him. That's right, Mallory. Stay where you are. Garrison advanced into the courtroom, his gun trained on Clara. You destroyed everything. My career, my reputation, my life. But I'll be damned if I let you walk away from this. You destroyed yourself, Clara said, surprising herself with her calm. We just held up the mirror. Shut up. Garrison's hand shook with rage. Judge, you're going to dismiss all charges and declare this trial a mistrial. Then these two are leaving with me. Judge Thornton stood slowly. Sheriff Garrison, you're making things worse for yourself. Put down the gun. I've got nothing left to lose, Judge. Either they die here or they die somewhere else, but they're dying today. Clara saw Jonas tense, ready to move despite the guns pointed at him. She also saw Father Miguel in the gallery, slowly reaching for something beneath his cassock. And there, near the door, federal marshals were quietly positioning themselves. You're wrong, Clara said, drawing Garrison's attention back to her. You do have something to lose. Your life. You kill us here, in front of all these witnesses, and you'll hang for certain. I'll hang anyway, thanks to you. Maybe. Or maybe you could still make a deal. Tell them who's really behind this conspiracy. Give up the bigger fish and you might avoid the noose. Garrison laughed bitterly. You think I'm stupid? The moment I talk, I'm dead. They have reach you can't imagine. Then you're trapped, either way. But at least if you put the gun down, you'll have a chance. For a moment, Garrison seemed to waver. Then his face hardened. No, if I'm going down, I'm taking you with me. Several things happened simultaneously. Garrison raised his gun toward Clara. Jonas launched himself from his position, trying to reach her. Father Miguel pulled out a concealed pistol and fired. Federal marshals rushed forward. The gunshot was impossibly loud in the confined space. Clara felt something hot streak past her face, felt Jonas's body slam into hers, driving her to the ground. More gunshots erupted as marshals exchanged fire with Garrison's men. When the smoke cleared, Garrison lay on the courtroom floor, Father Miguel's shot having caught him in the shoulder. His men were either down or surrendering. Jonas was on top of Clara, shielding her with his body, blood spreading across his shirt. Jonas! Clara scrambled to see where he was hit, finding a graze along his ribs. You're hurt. I'm fine, he said through gritted teeth. Are you? She kissed him, not caring about the crowd of witnesses or the chaos around them. When she pulled back, there were tears streaming down her face. Don't ever do that again, she said fiercely. Don't you dare try to die for me. Can't promise that, Jonas replied, managing a weak smile. Seems to be a habit. Judge Thornton's voice rang out over the chaos. Order! We will have order. As marshals restored calm and medical help arrived, the judge addressed the courtroom. Despite this interruption, we will continue. Justice will not be deterred by violence. The trial resumed an hour later, with Jonas testifying from a chair, his wound bandaged. He told his story simply and powerfully. The false accusations, the frame job, the years of running. When he produced corroborating evidence, including affidavits from the Mexican children who'd been his alibi, several jury members were visibly moved. By the end of the day, the verdict was unanimous. The conspiracy was real, the crimes proven, and warrants were issued for dozens of co-conspirators across Texas. Jonas Mallory was officially cleared of all charges, his name restored. As they left the courthouse, surrounded by federal marshals for protection, Clara found herself overwhelmed by the crowd. People pressed forward, some offering congratulations, others seeking help with their own cases against Samuel's network. It's not over, she said to Jonas as they finally reached the boarding house. All these people hurt by Samuel and his partners. They need help rebuilding their lives. Then we'll help them, Jonas said simply. Together. That night, as Clara tended to Jonas's wound in the boarding house parlor, Judge Thornton visited one last time. I wanted to thank you both personally, he said. What you've done took extraordinary courage. Texas owes you a debt. We just wanted justice, Clara replied. And you got it. But now comes the harder part, deciding what to do with your freedom. The judge looked between them meaningfully. I hope you'll both choose to stay in Texas. We need people like you, people who aren't afraid to stand up for what's right. After he left, Clara and Jonas sat together in the parlor, watching the fire burn low in the hearth. So what now? Jonas asked. You've got your justice. Your freedom. You could go anywhere, be anyone. Clara considered the question. I want to go back to Dust Haven. Jonas looked at her in surprise. After everything that happened there? Because of everything that happened there. The bank is mine now, legally and morally. I want to run it right, help the people Samuel hurt. The Hendersons should get their farm back. Old man Patterson should keep his store. She paused, gathering courage for the next part. But I don't want to do it alone. Jonas was quiet for a long moment. Clara, I'm still a man with a reputation. Even cleared, people will always see me as the silent outlaw. Good. Maybe that reputation will keep the next Samuel from trying to take advantage. She turned to face him fully. Jonas, I'm not asking you to marry me or make any grand declarations. I'm just asking you to come back with me. Help me rebuild. See what grows from the ashes. He studied her face in the firelight, seeing the strength that had carried her through hell and back. You know, people will talk. The widow and the outlaw, together before the ground has settled on her husband's grave. Let them talk. I've been the subject of gossip my whole life. At least now it'll be interesting gossip. Jonas laughed, then winced as it pulled at his wound. You're impossible. I learned from the best. She took his hand, interlacing their fingers. So? Will you come back with me? Clara Whitmore, he said, bringing her hand to his lips. I would follow you into hell itself. We've already been there, she reminded him. Now we're going somewhere better. 3 weeks later, after the immediate danger had passed and the trial's aftermath had settled, Clara and Jonas returned to Dusthaven. Father Miguel accompanied them, having decided the town could use a priest who understood that sometimes justice required more than prayers. The townspeople gathered to watch as Clara reopened the bank, this time with new policies posted clearly in the window. Fair loans. Second chances. No family turned out in winter. Jonas stood beside her, no longer hiding in shadows but still wearing his black clothes. Some habits died hard. That first day, the Hendersons came to reclaim their farm deed. Clara handed it over with her own hands, tearing up the foreclosure notice in front of them. Old man Patterson was next, his store saved from auction. One by one, the families Samuel had destroyed came forward, and one by one, Clara tried to make things right. It wasn't easy. Some people still whispered about her relationship with Jonas, which had evolved into something deeper than either had expected. Others questioned whether a woman could run a bank. But Clara had faced down gunmen and corrupt lawmen. Town gossips held no fear for her now. You know, Jonas said one evening as they worked late in the bank office, going through applications for fair loans, this isn't how I expected my life to go. Disappointed? Clara asked, looking up from her ledger. No, surprised. I spent so long focused on revenge that I never thought about what came after. He moved around the desk to stand beside her. Never thought I'd find someone who understood the weight of being broken and choosing to rebuild anyway. Clara stood, facing him in the lamplight. We're not broken anymore, Jonas. We're just differently whole. Differently whole, he repeated, smiling. I like that. Outside, snow began to fall, unusual for Texas, but then unusual had become their normal. Clara thought about the roses Jonas had left on Samuel's grave, blooming impossibly in winter. Now she understood they hadn't been a miracle. They'd been a choice, a deliberate act of bringing beauty into a dead place. That's what they were doing now with Dusthaven, with the bank, with their own scarred hearts, making the choice to plant something beautiful in barren ground and tend it until it grew. Jonas, she said suddenly, there's something I need to tell you. He looked at her with concern. What is it? I love you. The words came out simple and sure. I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that to anyone again, but I do. I love you. Jonas's eyes widened, then softened with an emotion so profound it took Clara's breath away. Clara, You don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know. He kissed her, cutting off her words as she'd cut off his weeks ago. When they parted, he pressed his forehead to hers. I love you too, he said quietly, have since the moment you stood up to 8 armed men with nothing but courage and a prayer. That was stupid, Clara laughed, tears threatening. That was magnificent, just like you. They stood together in the bank that had once been Samuel's monument to greed, now transformed into something better. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing Dust Haven in white, covering the old scars with something pure and new. The months that followed their return to Dust Haven brought challenges Clara hadn't anticipated. While she'd expected resistance to her progressive banking policies, she hadn't prepared for the systematic sabotage that began 3 months after reopening. It started small, ledgers going missing, deposits recorded incorrectly, loans mysteriously denied despite her approval. Jonas noticed the pattern before she did. "Someone's working against you from the inside, Jed," he said one evening, spreading the altered documents across her desk. "Look at the handwriting on these changes. It's consistent, deliberate." Clara studied the papers, her heart sinking as she recognized the penmanship. Thomas Brennan, Samuel's head clerk. "I kept him on because he knew the system, had families depending on him." "Loyalty to Samuel runs deep," Jonas said grimly. "We should have expected this." Before Clara could respond, the bank's front door burst open despite the late hour. Thomas Brennan himself stood there, but he wasn't alone. Behind him were 5 men Clara recognized as former associates of Samuel's, including Marcus Webb, a cattle baron who'd profited immensely from the foreclosures. "Mrs. Whitmore," Webb said, tipping his hat mockingly, "we need to discuss the future of this establishment." Jonas's hand moved to his gun, but Clara touched his arm, stopping him. "Gentlemen, the bank is closed. If you have business, come back tomorrow." "Our business can't wait," Webb replied, stepping inside uninvited. "You see, your late husband owed us certain considerations, debts that have transferred to you." "Samuel's criminal arrangements died with him," Clara said firmly. Webb laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Criminal? We prefer to call them business partnerships, and they're very much alive." He pulled out a document. "This is Samuel's real will, the one he filed in Dallas, not the forgery you presented in Austin." Clara's blood ran cold as she examined the paper. It looked authentic, down to Samuel's distinctive signature. According to this will, the bank and all assets were to be held in trust by a board of directors, comprised entirely of the men standing before her. "This is fake," Jonas said flatly. "Prove it," Webb challenged. "We have witnesses, a judge in Dallas who authenticated it, and legal backing that would tie you up in court for years. Or ... quote." He paused, smiling. "You could be reasonable. Continue Samuel's policies and we'll let you remain as a figurehead. Pretty widow running the bank, everyone's happy. And if I refuse, then you lose everything. The bank, the house, even your reputation when we reveal certain indiscretions about your relationship with Mr. Mallory here." Webb's eyes glittered with malice. "Started awful quick after poor Samuel's death, didn't it? Some might say suspiciously quick." Clara felt rage building in her chest, the same cold fury that had sustained her through 7 years of marriage to Samuel. But before she could respond, Father Miguel entered through the back door, followed by Judge Thornton and 6 federal marshals. "Gentlemen," Judge Thornton said pleasantly. "What fortuitous timing. We were just discussing your forged documents with the federal prosecutor." Webb's face went white. "Judge Thornton? What are you doing here?" "Investigating fraud, conspiracy, and attempted extortion. You see, Mrs. Whitmore had the foresight to telegraph me when irregularities started appearing. We've been building a case for weeks." Thomas Brennan tried to run, but Jonas caught him before he reached the door. The marshals moved in, efficiently disarming and restraining Webb's men. "You can't prove anything," Webb snarled as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. Judge Thornton smiled. "Actually, we can. Your forger in Dallas confessed yesterday. Apparently, federal prison seemed preferable to what you threatened if he didn't cooperate." As the marshals led the conspirators away, Clara sank into her chair, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. Jonas knelt beside her, his hand covering hers. "It's not over," she said quietly. "There will be others. Samuel had too many partners, too many people who profited from his corruption." "Then we'll face them," Jonas replied. "Every last one." Judge Thornton cleared his throat. "Actually, there's something else we need to discuss. The federal government has been impressed with how you've handled this situation, Mrs. Whitmore. They're offering you a position, special investigator for banking fraud across Texas." Clara looked up in surprise. "Me?" But I'm not a lawman. No, but you understand how these corruption networks operate. You've lived inside one, and Mr. Mallory's reputation and skills would make him an ideal partner in such endeavors. Jonas and Clara exchanged glances. It was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to expand their fight for justice beyond Dusthaven, but it would also mean constant danger, always looking over their shoulders. Can we think about it? Claire asked. Of course. But don't take too long. The corruption Samuel was part of has tentacles reaching into New Mexico and Oklahoma. We need people willing to root it out. After the judge left, Clara and Jonas sat in the empty bank, processing everything that had happened. The lamp flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Special investigators, Jonas mused. Never thought I'd be on that side of the law. You've always been on the side of justice, Clara corrected. The law just finally caught up. A soft knock interrupted them. Clara opened the door to find a young woman with a baby in her arms, her face gaunt with hunger and desperation. Please, the woman said. I know it's late, but I heard you give second chances. My husband died in the mines, and we're about to lose everything. Clara immediately ushered her inside. Come in, sit down, tell me what you need. The woman's story was heartbreakingly familiar. Predatory lending, impossible interest rates, a family about to be destroyed by debt. Clara listened, took notes, and then did something Samuel would never have done. She forgave the debt entirely and arranged for a small loan to help the woman start a seamstress business. I don't understand, the woman said, tears streaming down her face. Why would you do this? Because someone should have done it for me years ago, Clara replied simply. After the woman left, blessing Clara with every step, Jonas pulled her into his arms. You know we can't save everyone, he said gently. No, but we can try. One family at a time, one injustice at a time. She looked up at him. About the judge's offer. I know what you're thinking, and I agree. We should take it. Clara pulled back slightly. You do? Dusthaven is healing, but there are other towns suffering under men like Samuel. If we can help them. He shrugged. Besides, I've gotten used to impossible odds. They're starting to feel normal. Clara laughed, the sound bright in the quiet bank. Jonas Mallory, special investigator. Your wanted posters will need updating. From wanted dead or alive to wanted to arrest criminals. Has a nice ring to it. They were interrupted by another arrival. This time, Mrs. Henderson, the farmer's wife Clara had helped months ago. But she wasn't seeking aid. She carried a basket of freshly baked bread and preserves. For you, she said, pressing the basket into Clara's hands. It's not much, but we wanted to thank you. The farm's producing again, and my husband's health has improved now that we're not under constant stress. Mrs. Henderson, you don't need to. Yes, I do. You gave us our life back. This is the least we can do. After Mrs. Henderson left, Clara found herself crying, not from sadness, but from an overwhelming sense of purpose fulfilled. This was what Samuel had never understood. True power came not from taking, but from giving, not from fear, but from respect. The next morning brought unexpected news. A telegraph from Austin informed them that Sheriff Garrison had been found dead in his cell, apparently poisoned. A note pinned to his chest read, Loose tongues sink ships. They killed him to keep him quiet, Jonas said, his expression dark. Whoever's really behind this conspiracy is cleaning house. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. If they killed Garrison, one of their own, then we're definitely targets. Jonas checked his guns, a habit that had become routine. We need to be more careful. Father Miguel arrived with his own disturbing news. 3 families came to the church last night, all with the same story. Men have been approaching them, offering to buy their property for well above market value, but only if they leave Texas immediately. Someone's trying to empty the town, Clara realized. But why? Railroad, Jonas said suddenly. I heard rumors in Austin. There's a new line being planned, and it's supposed to come through this area. If someone knew the exact route, they could buy up the land cheap and make a fortune when the railroad arrives. Clara's anger flared. It's Samuel's playbook all over again. They spent the day investigating, following paper trails and questioning townspeople. The pattern became clear. A systematic attempt to buy out Dusthaven, led by a mysterious company called Lone Star Holdings. But whoever was behind it had learned from Samuel's mistakes. There were no obvious criminal activities, just aggressive but legal business tactics. That evening, as Clara worked late in the bank again, she heard a noise from the vault room. This time, she didn't hesitate. Gun in hand, Jonas had taught her to shoot properly. She moved toward the sound. A man in expensive clothes stood examining the vault, making notes in a leather journal. He looked up when Clara entered, showing no surprise at the gun pointed at him. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've been expecting you." "Who are you?" "Randolph Morrison. I represent certain interests that were affiliated with your late husband." He adjusted his gold cufflinks casually. "I'm here to make you an offer you shouldn't refuse." "I'm not interested in any offers." Morrison smiled, a cold expression that reminded Clara painfully of Samuel. $1 million, cash. All you have to do is sell the bank and leave Texas." "No." $2 million. The answer will always be no." Morrison sighed. "I was hoping to avoid unpleasantness. You see, Mrs. Whitmore, the organization I represent has extensive resources and no qualms about using them. Your friend Garrison discovered that. You killed him. He became a liability, as you're becoming." Morrison moved closer, seemingly unbothered by Clara's gun. "But I prefer negotiation to violence. $3 million and a guarantee of safety for you and Mr. Mallory." "Get out," Clara said, cocking the gun. "Now." Morrison studied her for a moment, then nodded. "As you wish. But remember, Mrs. Whitmore, you're playing in a game much larger than you understand. Samuel was a small fish. The sharks are coming." He walked past her calmly, pausing at the door. "You have 48 hours to reconsider. After that, I can't guarantee your safety." As soon as he left, Clara rushed to find Jonas and Father Miguel. They gathered in the church, the one place they felt secure from listening ears. "Morrison," Father Miguel said after hearing Clara's account. "I know that name. He's connected to banks in California, mining operations in Colorado. If he's involved, this is bigger than we thought." "We need help," Jonas said. "Federal marshals, the cavalry, something." "I'll telegraph Judge Thornton tonight," Clara decided. "But we also need to protect the townspeople. If Morrison's threatening us, others are in danger too." They spent the night organizing a town watch, arming trusted citizens, and preparing for whatever Morrison might bring. But the attack, when it came, wasn't what they expected. The next morning, Clara arrived at the bank to find it surrounded by Texas Rangers. Captain William Hayes, a man Clara recognized as one of Samuel's former associates, stood on the steps with official-looking documents. "Mrs. Whitmore, by order of the Texas Banking Commission, this institution is hereby closed pending investigation of financial irregularities." "What irregularities?" Clara demanded. "Missing funds, improper loans, suspected embezzlement." Hayes' smile was triumphant. "You'll need to surrender all records and vacate the premises immediately." Clara saw Morrison watching from across the street, tipping his hat mockingly. This was his play. If he couldn't buy the bank, he'd destroy it through legal manipulation. "You can't do this," Jonas said, appearing beside Clara. "This is harassment, pure and simple." "It's the law, Mr. Mallory." "Unless you'd like to be arrested for obstruction." Hayes' hand rested on his pistol. Clara's mind raced. If they closed the bank, even temporarily, the people depending on it would suffer. Loans would be called in, accounts frozen. Morrison would win without firing a shot. "Wait," she said suddenly. "I demand an immediate audit. Full transparency witnessed by townspeople." Hayes frowned. "That's not standard procedure." "Nothing about this is standard, Captain. You're acting on a complaint, aren't you? I have the right to respond with evidence." Father Miguel stepped forward. "I'll witness the audit, as will Mayor Patterson and Dr. Brennan." A crowd was gathering, drawn by the commotion. Clara saw the Hendersons, the woman with the baby from last night, dozens of people she'd helped over the past months. They all watched with concern and growing anger. "This is what they do," Clara addressed the crowd, her voice carrying clearly. "When they can't buy us, they try to destroy us through corrupt law. But we have something they don't. Community, truth, the courage to stand together." "Pretty words won't save your bank," Hayes said dismissively. "No, but these will." Judge Thornton's voice rang out as he pushed through the crowd, accompanied by a dozen federal marshals. Captain Hayes, you're under arrest for conspiracy and accepting bribes. Hayes went for his gun but found himself staring down multiple rifle barrels. He raised his hand slowly, his face flushed with rage. You can't arrest a Texas Ranger. I can when that Ranger is corrupt. Thornton held up a telegram. Morrison was sloppy. We traced the payments from his company directly to your personal account. $20,000 to close this bank illegally. As Hayes was led away, Morrison started to slip into the crowd. But Jonas was faster. He caught the man's arm, spinning him around. Leaving so soon? Morrison jerked free, his composure finally cracking. You think you've won? You've only delayed the inevitable. My employers have resources beyond your imagination. Then let them come, Clara said, stepping forward. We'll face them just like we faced Samuel, Garrison, and now you. Morrison's eyes glittered with hatred. You're going to regret this, Mrs. Whitmore. Both of you will. The only thing I regret, Clara replied, is that it took me 7 years to find my courage. But I have it now, and nothing you or your employers do will take it away. Morrison left under federal escort, though Clara knew he'd likely avoid serious consequences. Men like him always had good lawyers and better connections. But they'd won this battle, and that mattered. The crowd erupted in celebration. People pressed forward to shake Clara's hand, to thank her for standing up to the corruption that had plagued Texas for so long. Jonas stood beside her, proud and protective, while Father Miguel offered prayers of thanksgiving. That night, there was a celebration at the church. The whole town came together, sharing food and stories, united by their small victory against powerful forces. Clara found herself dancing with Jonas, something she hadn't done since before her marriage to Samuel. You know this isn't over, Jonas said as they swayed to the fiddle music. I know, Morrison was right about one thing. We're small fish in a big pond. But small fish can swim together, Jonas reminded her. Make themselves too big to swallow. Clara smiled, resting her head against his chest. When did you become so philosophical? Sometime between getting shot at and falling in love with an impossible woman. She looked up at him, seeing the warmth in his gray eyes. Jonas. Marry me, he said suddenly, the words tumbling out. I know it's too soon. I know people will talk. But Clara, I don't want to face whatever comes next without knowing you're truly mine and I'm truly yours. Clara's breath caught. Marriage. The word that had once meant prison now offered something else entirely. Partnership, choice, love freely given. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Jonas Mallory, I'll marry you. He kissed her there in the middle of the church social, in front of God and everyone, and Clara didn't care about propriety or scandal. She'd earned the right to choose her own happiness. Father Miguel married them 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony. Clara wore her mother's wedding dress, retrieved from storage and altered to fit. Jonas wore his black suit but added a white rose to his lapel, a reminder of how their story began. The wedding was interrupted only once when a telegram arrived from Judge Thornton. Morrison had disappeared, likely fled to Mexico, but his network was being dismantled piece by piece. He also formally offered them both positions as special investigators, with authority to pursue corruption throughout the Southwest. What do you think, Mrs. Mallory? Jonas asked, using her new name for the first time. Clara looked around the church, at the townspeople who'd become family, at the life they'd built from the ashes of Samuel's cruelty. Then she looked at Jonas, her husband by choice, her partner in justice. I think we accept, she said. But Dust Haven remains our home. We'll always come back here. Always, Jonas agreed. As they signed the marriage certificate, Clara noticed Jonas had officially changed his name too, not just adding Mallory to hers, but taking her strength as his own. Jonas and Clara Mallory, united in name as they'd been united in purpose for months. The celebration continued late into the night, but eventually Clara and Jonas slipped away to the small house they'd bought at the edge of town. Not Samuel's mansion with its bitter memories, but something new, something theirs. Do you ever regret it? Jonas asked as they stood on the porch, looking at the stars. Everything we've been through? No, Clara said without hesitation. Every moment of pain led to this, led to us. I wouldn't change any of it. Not even Samuel. Clara considered the question seriously. Especially not Samuel. He taught me what I didn't want, what I wouldn't accept, what I could survive. Without him, I might never have found my strength. Jonas pulled her closer. He didn't give you that strength, Clara. You always had it. Maybe, but you helped me find it. Those roses on his grave, they weren't just about beauty surviving. They were about choosing to create beauty despite the ugliness. That's what we're doing now. A rider approached their house, moving fast. Both tensed until they recognized young Tommy Patterson, the mayor's son. "Mrs. Mallory! Mr. Mallory!" he called out breathlessly. "Message from Austin." They caught Morrison trying to cross into Mexico. He's offering to testify about the whole network in exchange for leniency. Clara and Jonas exchanged glances. If Morrison talked, they could unravel the entire conspiracy Samuel had been part of, reaching players they hadn't even identified yet. "We'll leave at dawn," Jonas decided. "Together," Clara added. Tommy rode off with their response, and Clara and Jonas went inside their new home. It was sparse still, but clean and honest. Everything their lives had become. "Are you ready for this?" Jonas asked. "Once Morrison starts talking, we'll have targets on our backs from every corrupt official in the Southwest." Clara checked the gun Jonas had given her, now as familiar as her wedding ring. "I've had a target on my back since the day I defied Samuel's memory. At least now I'm shooting back." Jonas laughed, pulling her into his arms. "Have I told you today that you're magnificent?" "Only 3 times. You're slipping." "Then let me make it 4. He kissed her deeply, and Clara felt the last walls around her heart crumble. This was what Samuel had never understood. True power came from vulnerability, from trusting someone else with your broken pieces and letting them help you rebuild. That night, as they lay together in their marriage bed, Clara traced the scars on Jonas's body, each one a testament to his survival, his refusal to surrender. "We're quite a pair," she murmured. "The widow and the outlaw." "Former widow," Jonas corrected. "Former outlaw. Now we're something new." "What?" "Free," he said simply. "Finally, completely free." Clara thought about that freedom, how much it had cost, how much it was worth. Tomorrow they'd ride to Austin to face new dangers. Morrison's testimony would unleash forces they couldn't fully predict. But tonight, she was in the arms of a man who loved her, in a home they'd chosen, in a life they'd built from courage and conviction. "Jonas," she said softly. "Thank you for the roses." He understood what she meant, not just the flowers on Samuel's grave, but everything they represented. The reminder that beauty could bloom in winter, that broken things could grow strong, that love could flourish in the most unlikely soil. "Always," he promised, and Clara believed him. Outside, a storm was building on the horizon. But inside their small house, there was warmth and light and the quiet certainty that whatever came next, they would face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, unafraid, and absolutely unwilling to surrender. The story of Clara and Jonas Mallory was far from over. Morrison's testimony would open new chapters, bring new challenges. There would be more corruption to fight, more families to save, more justice to pursue. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, Clara rested in the arms of her chosen husband, thinking about roses blooming in winter and the mysterious ways that suffering could transform into strength. She'd been Samuel's victim once, but that woman was as dead as Samuel himself. In her place stood Clara Mallory, banker, investigator, wife by choice, and living proof that sometimes the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was simply choosing to live well, love freely, and never again apologize for either. The journey to Austin began before dawn, Clara and Jonas riding hard through the morning mist. Morrison's testimony was scheduled for noon, and Judge Thornton had warned them that attempts might be made to silence him before he could speak. They'd barely gone 10 miles when Jonas suddenly pulled up his horse, his hand moving to his rifle. "Riders coming," he said quietly. 6, maybe 7, moving fast from the east. Clara checked her own weapons, a habit that had become second nature. Friends or foes? In my experience, friends don't ride that hard unless someone's dying. They took cover behind a cluster of rocks, watching as the riders approached. Clara recognized the lead figure, Marcus Webb's son, Daniel, who'd supposedly been studying law in Boston. His presence here meant the corruption network had received word of Morrison's planned testimony. "They're heading for Austin," Jonas observed. "Same as us." "We have to warn Judge Thornton," Clara said, but even as she spoke, she knew they couldn't outrace 7 fresh horses. Jonas studied the terrain with the eye of someone who'd spent years using the land for survival. "There's another way. Harder, but faster. Through Devil's Canyon." Clara knew the route, a treacherous path that would save them 3 hours but risk their horses and possibly their lives. Samuel always said that canyon was impassable. "Samuel said a lot of things that weren't true," Jonas replied, already turning his horse toward the narrow canyon entrance. "Besides, impossible odds are becoming our specialty." They plunged into Devil's Canyon as the sun climbed higher. The path was barely wide enough for a single horse, with walls of red rock rising on either side. More than once, Clara's mount stumbled on loose stones, and only Jonas's steady presence ahead kept her from panicking. Halfway through, they encountered an obstacle that hadn't been there before, a rock slide blocking the path, likely caused by recent rains. Jonas dismounted, studying the barrier with grim determination. "We can climb over," he said. "Lead the horses around the base." "That'll take hours," Clara protested. "Not if we're smart about it." Jonas began moving rocks, creating a narrow passage. "Help me with this." They worked together in the rising heat, hands bloodied from sharp stones, clothes torn by the effort. But within an hour, they'd cleared enough space for the horses to squeeze through. As they remounted on the other side, Clara caught Jonas's arm. "Your hands," she said, seeing the deep cuts across his palms. "They'll heal." "Morrison might not live long enough to testify if we don't hurry." They emerged from the canyon with the sun directly overhead, Austin visible in the distance. But as they approached the city, they saw smoke rising from the federal courthouse. Clara's heart sank. They were too late. "Fire!" someone shouted as they galloped into town. "The courthouse is burning!" Jonas and Clara pushed through the crowd gathered around the building. Federal marshals were carrying out documents and furniture while a bucket brigade fought the flames. Judge Thornton stood directing efforts, his face grim with soot and anger. "Morrison?" Clara asked breathlessly. "Safe," the judge replied. "We moved him to a secure location last night. This was a diversion. While everyone's fighting the fire, Webb's men are probably trying to find him." "Where is he?" Jonas asked. "The old Spanish mission, north of town." "I have marshals guarding him, but if Webb brought enough men—" Jonas was already moving back to his horse. "We'll get there first." Clara followed, and they rode hard toward the mission. The ancient building stood isolated on a hill, its adobe walls glowing gold in the afternoon sun. Everything seemed peaceful, too peaceful. "Where are the guards?" Clara asked, dread building in her stomach. They found the marshals unconscious but alive, hidden in the mission's garden. Someone had drugged them, a professional job that spoke of careful planning rather than violence. Inside the mission, voices echoed from the sanctuary. Clara and Jonas crept forward, using the shadows of the colonnade for cover. Through the archway, they could see Morrison tied to a chair, while Daniel Webb and 3 other men stood around him. "Last chance, Morrison," Daniel was saying. "Recant your testimony. Say you were coerced, and you might live through this." "Go to hell," Morrison spat, though his voice trembled. Daniel pulled out a knife. "That can be arranged." Jonas signaled to Clara. He'd go left, she'd go right. They'd done this before. Learn to move as one despite being two. Clara circled around to the mission's side entrance while Jonas positioned himself near the main doors. "You know," Morrison said suddenly, his voice stronger, "you're making the same mistake your father did. You assume fear is the only power that matters." "Fear worked well enough for Samuel Whitmore," Daniel replied. "And look where Samuel is now, dead and disgraced while his widow rebuilds everything he destroyed." Daniel backhanded Morrison viciously. "That bitch will join her husband soon enough." Clara felt rage course through her, but she held position, waiting for Jonas's signal. It came in the form of a hymnal thrown through the window, shattering glass and drawing everyone's attention. Clara stepped out from behind a pillar, gun raised. "Actually, this bitch is very much alive," she said coolly, "and you're under arrest." Daniel spun toward her, but Jonas appeared from the other direction, his rifle trained on the group. "Drop your weapons. Now." For a moment, nobody moved. Then Daniel smiled, a cold expression that reminded Clara painfully of his father. "You think you've won? You have no idea what you're truly fighting." "Enlighten us," Jonas said, his aim never wavering. "This goes beyond Texas, beyond Morrison's testimony. We have judges in Washington, senators in our pockets, connections you can't imagine. Kill us, arrest us, it doesn't matter. Others will take our place." "Maybe," Clara agreed, "but not today. And not here." One of Daniel's men made a sudden move for his gun. Jonas's shot took the weapon from his hand before he could aim it. The sound echoed through the sanctuary like thunder, and suddenly everyone was moving. Daniel dove behind the altar while his men scrambled for cover. Clara kept her gun on Morrison, protecting their witness while Jonas engaged the others. The firefight was brief but intense. Jonas's tactical experience showed as he systematically disarmed and disabled Daniel's men. But Daniel himself had vanished in the chaos. Clara spotted him climbing toward the bell tower and pursued, her boots slipping on the worn stone steps. She found him at the top, cornered with nowhere to run. The city of Austin spread below them, the courthouse still smoking in the distance. "You're destroying everything," Daniel said desperately. "The order we've built, the prosperity—" "Built on suffering," Clara interrupted. "Prosperity for the few at the expense of everyone else. That's how the world works. That's how your world worked. We're building something better." Daniel pulled a derringer from his coat, a last, desperate gambit, but Clara was faster, her months of training with Jonas paying off. Her shot knocked the small gun from his hand, sending it tumbling to the street below. "It's over, Daniel," she said quietly. Federal marshals, alerted by the gunfire, swarmed the mission. Daniel was arrested along with his men, and Morrison was secured for transport back to the courthouse. As they emerged from the mission, Judge Thornton met them with relief evident on his face. "Outstanding work, both of you. Morrison's testimony can proceed as scheduled." "What about the fire?" Jonas asked. "Controlled and extinguished. We lost some records, but nothing crucial. More importantly, we caught 2 of Webb's men trying to plant evidence in my office during the confusion." The testimony took place that afternoon in a packed courtroom that had been hastily cleaned of smoke damage. Morrison, his face bruised but his voice clear, laid out the entire network: names, dates, amounts, methods. He revealed corruption reaching into New Mexico, Colorado, even California. Samuel had been just one node in a web that stretched across the frontier. "How long has this been going on?" the prosecutor asked. 20 years at least, maybe longer. It started small, fixed card games, rigged land deals, but it grew into something monstrous. Judges bought, sheriffs controlled, entire towns under their thumb. And Samuel Whitmore's role? He was the money man for our region, laundered funds, managed bribes, coordinated foreclosures that drove people off valuable land. Morrison's eyes found Clara in the gallery. His widow disrupted everything when she refused to continue his practices. "Why come forward now?" the prosecutor pressed. Morrison was quiet for a moment. "Because I realized I was expendable. When they killed Garrison to silence him, I knew my turn would come eventually. Better to confess and live than die, protecting people who saw me as disposable." The testimony continued for hours, each revelation more damning than the last. By evening, warrants had been issued for 37 individuals across 4 states. It was the largest corruption investigation in Texas history. As they left the courthouse, Clara felt exhausted but vindicated. Years of suffering under Samuel's cruelty had led to this moment, his entire network of evil exposed and crumbling. "You did it," Jonas said, pulling her close. "You brought them all down." "We did it," Clara corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." "Mrs. Mallory," a young woman approached hesitantly. Clara recognized her as one of the clerks from the courthouse. "I wanted to thank you. My father lost his business to Samuel's schemes 5 years ago. He died thinking he was a failure. Now I know he was robbed. That means everything." Similar encounters followed as they made their way through Austin. People whose lives had been destroyed by the corruption network approached to share their stories, their gratitude, their hope for justice. Clara listened to each one, understanding that their fight was far from over. That night, in their hotel room, Jonas tended to Clara's injuries from the day's adventures, scraped hands from the rock slide, a gash on her arm from the mission fight. "We make quite the team," he said, carefully cleaning her wounds. "Samuel would be horrified," Clara said with dark satisfaction. His meek little wife becoming a federal investigator, bringing down his entire network. "You were never meek," Jonas said firmly. "Trapped, maybe. Scared, certainly, but never meek. It takes incredible strength to survive what you did." A knock at the door interrupted them. Jonas answered it carefully, gun ready, to find Father Miguel standing in the hallway. "I have news from Dusthaven," the priest said, his expression troubled. "There's been trouble." Clara's heart sank. What kind of trouble? Marcus Webb escaped custody during the fire. He's returned to Dusthaven with a dozen men, taken over the bank. He's holding hostages, the Hendersons, Dr. Brennan, several others. He says he'll kill them unless you return and sign the bank over to him. Jonas cursed softly. He's desperate. Desperate men do terrible things. "We have to go back," Clara said immediately. "It's a trap," Jonas warned. "He knows we'll come. He'll be ready." "I don't care. Those people trusted me, supported me. I won't abandon them." Judge Thornton, who had arrived with Father Miguel, spoke up. "I can send federal marshals." "No," Clara interrupted. "Webb will kill the hostages if he sees federal agents. This is personal. He wants Jonas and me." "Then you're walking into certain death," the judge protested. Clara looked at Jonas, seeing her own determination reflected in his eyes. "We've faced certain death before. At least this time we know what we're fighting for." They left within the hour, riding through the night toward Dusthaven. As they traveled, Clara thought about how much had changed since she'd stood at Samuel's grave that February day. She'd discovered strength she didn't know she had, found love she didn't think she deserved, and built a life from the ashes of her imprisonment. "Whatever happens," she told Jonas as they stopped to rest the horses, "I want you to know that these past months have been worth everything. Even if it ends tomorrow, it won't end," Jonas said firmly. "We've come too far, survived too much. Webb is just another obstacle, another test. And if he kills us?" Jonas pulled her close, his lips brushing her forehead. "Then we die free. We die fighting. We die together. There are worse fates." They reached Dusthaven at dawn, the town eerily quiet. The bank's windows were boarded up, armed men visible on the roof. A white flag hung from the door, a mockery of surrender that made Clara's blood boil. "How do you want to play this?" Jonas asked, studying the fortified building. "Straight on," Clara decided. "Webb expects tricks, distractions. Let's give him the confrontation he wants, but on our terms." They walked down Main Street side by side, no attempt at stealth or subterfuge. Citizens peered from windows and doorways, fear and hope warring on their faces. At the bank steps, Marcus Webb emerged, his clothes disheveled, his eyes wild with desperation. "The prodigal widow returns," he called out, "and her pet outlaw. How touching." "Let the hostages go, Webb," Clara said calmly. "Your fight is with us." "My fight is with the world you're trying to create, a world where people like me, builders, visionaries, are treated like criminals." "You are criminals," Jonas said flatly. "You built your vision on the bones of innocent people." Webb laughed bitterly. "Innocent? No one is innocent. Everyone has a price. Even your precious Clara sold herself to Samuel for security." Clara felt Jonas tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm. "You're right, Webb. I did sell myself, and I paid for that choice every day for 7 years. But I learned something Samuel never understood. Redemption is possible. Change is possible. It's not too late for you." "Spare me your sanctimony," Webb snarled. He pulled out a gun, aiming it at Clara. "Sign over the bank, or I start shooting hostages." "You shoot anyone, and federal marshals will storm this building," Clara warned. "Let them come. I'll be satisfied knowing I took you with me." It was then that Clara noticed something, movement in the windows of surrounding buildings. The townspeople hadn't fled. They'd armed themselves, taken positions. The butcher, the baker, the seamstress Clara had helped, all ready to fight for their town. "You're surrounded, Webb," she said softly. "Look around you." Webb glanced nervously at the windows, seeing rifle barrels appearing. His men on the roof shifted uneasily, realizing they were exposed to fire from multiple angles. "This is what Samuel never understood," Clara continued. "Real power doesn't come from fear or money. It comes from community, from people choosing to stand together." "Pretty words won't save your friends inside," Webb said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. "No, but this might." Mayor Patterson emerged from the crowd, accompanied by a Texas Ranger Clara didn't recognize, a young man with an honest face and determined eyes. "Captain James Norton, Texas Rangers," the young man announced. "Mr. Webb, I have a warrant for your arrest. Additionally, the bank you're occupying has been federally insured as of yesterday. Any damage to it or its contents is now a federal crime." Clara smiled slightly. Judge Thornton had worked fast, protecting the bank even as they rode to save it. Webb looked around wildly, seeing his escape routes closing. His men were already lowering their weapons, recognizing the futility of their situation. In desperation, he grabbed Clara, pressing his gun to her temple. "Everyone back off, or she dies!" Jonas moved faster than thought, his hand blurring as he drew and fired. Webb's gun flew from his hand and he screamed, clutching his bloodied fingers. Clara spun away from him as townspeople surged forward, overwhelming Webb's demoralized men. The hostages emerged from the bank, shaken but unharmed. Mrs. Henderson embraced Clara tearfully while Dr. Brennan checked her for injuries. The town had protected itself, proved that Samuel's legacy of fear no longer held power here. As Webb was led away in chains, he stopped beside Clara. "This isn't over. Others will come. The network is too big, too entrenched." "Maybe," Clara agreed, "but we'll be ready. And each time they come, more people will stand against them. Your network relied on isolation, on victims suffering alone. We're not alone anymore." The celebration that followed was subdued but genuine. The town had faced its demons and won, but everyone understood this was just one battle in a longer war. As Clara and Jonas stood in the bank, surveying the damage Webb's occupation had caused, Father Miguel joined them. "You've started something here," the priest said. "Word will spread. Other towns will find courage to resist their own oppressors." "That's the hope," Clara replied. "Samuel and his kind thrived on despair, on the belief that nothing could change. We're proving that's a lie." A commotion outside drew their attention. Judge Thornton had arrived with a contingent of federal marshals and someone Clara didn't expect, the governor of Texas himself. "Mrs. Mallory, Mr. Mallory," the governor said, tipping his hat, "I've been following your work with great interest. Texas owes you a debt." "We did what needed doing," Jonas said simply. "Nevertheless, I'd like to offer you both official positions. State investigators with full authority to pursue corruption wherever you find it. The pay is modest, but the backing is substantial." Clara and Jonas exchanged glances. It was everything they'd been working toward, official sanction for their crusade against corruption. "We accept," Clara said, "but Dust Haven remains our base. This is where it started, and this is where we'll always return." The governor smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way. Texas needs more towns like this, more people willing to stand up for what's right." As officials dispersed and the town returned to normal, Clara found herself alone with Jonas in the bank office where everything had begun. The roses he'd left on Samuel's grave seemed like a lifetime ago, though it had only been months. "No regrets?" Jonas asked, pulling her into his arms. "None," Clara said firmly. "Every choice, every risk, every impossible odd we faced, it all led us here." "And where is here exactly?" Clara looked around the office, then out at the town they'd helped save. "Home. Purpose. Love. Everything Samuel tried to deny me. Everything you helped me find." Jonas kissed her then, a promise and a celebration combined. When they parted, he was smiling in a way that transformed his weathered features. "You know we'll spend the rest of our lives fighting variations of Samuel and Webb," he warned. "Good," Clara said fiercely. "Let them come." We'll be ready. As the sun set over Dusthaven, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here. From widow to warrior, from outlaw to lawman, from broken individuals to partners united in purpose and love. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Morrison's testimony would send ripples throughout the frontier. The corrupt network would try to regroup, to strike back. But tonight, Clara stood in the bank Samuel had built on suffering, now transformed into a beacon of hope. She had Jonas beside her, a town behind her, and a future ahead that she'd carved from courage and conviction. The banker's widow had held her breath through 7 years of marriage, but the silent outlaw had taught her to breathe again. Not with kisses alone, but with purpose, with freedom, with the knowledge that broken things could indeed grow strong. "What are you thinking?" Jonas asked, watching her expression. "That Samuel was wrong about everything," Clara replied. "He said romance was for fools and poets, that fear was the only real power, that people couldn't change. But look at us, proof that love conquers fear, that people can transform, that poetry and justice can be the same thing." Jonas smiled, pulling her closer. "Samuel was a fool who couldn't see the treasure he had in you." "His loss became my gain," Clara said, then corrected herself. "Our gain." As they stood together in the gathering darkness, Clara felt the last shadows of her past life fade away. She was no longer Samuel's widow, no longer defined by what had been done to her. She was Clara Mallory, investigator, protector, wife by choice, and living proof that sometimes the greatest revenge wasn't destruction, but transformation. The network Morrison had exposed would take years to fully dismantle. There would be danger, setbacks, moments of doubt. But Clara had learned something valuable from those roses blooming on Samuel's grave. Beauty wasn't just about surviving the winter. It was about choosing to bloom despite it, about creating something worth protecting from the frozen ground of suffering. "Ready for tomorrow?" Jonas asked as they finally left the bank, locking it carefully behind them. Clara took his hand, interlacing their fingers. Two people who'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to walk toward the light together. "I've been ready my whole life," she said. "I just didn't know it until now." They walked through Dusthaven's streets, greeting neighbors, checking on those who'd been held hostage, making sure their town was truly safe. This was their responsibility now, not just to fight corruption, but to nurture what grew in its absence. "Jonas," Clara said suddenly, stopping in front of the church where they'd been married. "I want to tell you something." He looked at her with concern. "What is it?" "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them for a moment, Jonas's eyes widening with shock, then joy, then concern. "Clara, are you sure?" "Dr. Brennan confirmed it yesterday, before we left for Austin. I wanted to wait for the right moment to tell you." Jonas pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of spun glass. "A child. Our child. Are you happy?" "Happy?" Jonas laughed, the sound rich with emotion. "Clara, you've given me everything. Freedom, purpose, love, and now a future I never dared imagine. Happy doesn't begin to describe it." They stood there in the street, two people who'd walked through hell and emerged not unscathed but unbroken. The child growing within Clara was more than new life. It was a promise that their story would continue, that the justice they fought for would matter for generations to come. "Samuel would hate this," Clara said with dark satisfaction. "His widow carrying another man's child, raising it to stand against everything he represented." "Samuel's dead," Jonas reminded her gently. "This isn't about him anymore. It's about us. About the world we're building for our child." Clara nodded, one hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "A world where banks help instead of hurt. Where law means justice, not oppression. Where children grow up free." "That's a world worth fighting for," Jonas agreed. As they walked home together, Clara thought about the strange path that had brought them here. If someone had told her that February day at Samuel's grave that she'd find love with an outlaw, become a federal investigator, and carry the child of a man who truly loved her, she would have thought them mad. But life, Clara had learned, was far stranger and more beautiful than anything she could have imagined. It could place roses on graves in winter, turn widows into warriors, transform outlaws into heroes. Most importantly, it could take two broken people and forge them into something unbreakable. The stars came out over Dust Haven, bright and clear in the Texas sky. Clara and Jonas stood on their porch, looking up at them, thinking about all the challenges ahead and all the love that would see them through. "No matter what comes next," Jonas said softly, "we face it together." "Together," Clara agreed, the word a vow as binding as any marriage oath. Inside their house, on the mantel, stood a vase containing 3 roses, red, white, and red again. They'd been preserved, a reminder of where their story began. But Clara knew the real story wasn't in those dead flowers. It was in the living love between them, the child growing within her, the town they protected, the justice they served. Samuel had been wrong about so many things, but most of all, he'd been wrong about power. True power wasn't in taking, but in giving. Not in breaking, but in building. Not in fear, but in the courage to love despite the risk of loss. As Clara settled into Jonas's arms that night, she thought she could hear Samuel turning in his grave. Good, she thought. Let him spin for eternity, knowing that everything he'd built had crumbled while everything he'd tried to destroy had flourished. The banker's widow had indeed held her breath, but only until she learned to breathe free.